Understanding the importance of identifying the options that can make reaching targets easier is really one of the most important parts of planning. G'day, I'm Debra Caldow, and welcome to the Red Giraffe Solutions Expanding Worlds podcast, where we aim to support you as you help your young person with additional needs plan for their future, a future where they are safe, secure, and live a rewarding and fulfilling life. From around the world, I share stories and share solutions from people making this possible right now. I'm a parent of a young person with additional needs, so I understand the challenges. Many of the people I've interviewed on this podcast have already helped me design a better future for my daughter, and I hope that they might help you as well to imagine what's possible for your young person. Over the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about housing, which is one of the main things that really needs to be planned out, especially in the medium to long term. So in this episode, I wanted to talk about planning and share some of the things that we've done which have worked. Of course, we all plan all the time, especially when our children are younger. I'm sure it's not just me that used to think getting my children out the door to school took more planning than the mission to Mars, and was often about as successful. But as a parent of a young person with additional needs, I quickly came to realise that one of my most important roles was ensuring that my daughter had a plan for her future, and she needed a short-term, medium and long-term plan. Like for many of us, school wasn't just a case of the closest one to where we lived would be fine. It needed a plan, and then moving out of education needed a plan. And of course all the other things, like planning for the support she will need when I'm no longer around. Our involvement in planning our children's futures is necessary, because in some instances our young people may need support to make a plan, or if they do make a plan, they may need support to execute that plan. A good plan is like a map, providing a direction of travel. This idea of a map is the reason we developed the Red Giraffe Route map, which we've used to plan our daughter's future in 4 areas: daily living, purpose, relationships and finance. We also developed the vocal method, which stands for vision, options, create, assess, legacy, to make it easier to build a plan in those 4 areas. So we have a short-term plan, a medium-term plan and a long-term plan for each of those areas of her life. Both provide a structure to help develop the plan, because as easy as it might sound, putting a plan together can be challenging. And there are plenty of barriers to getting a plan together. One is obviously time. Often our daily lives are busy and we find it difficult to find that time to sit down and talk about the future. And another barrier is often what I call planning avoidance. No one wants to talk about when they die. We don't want to think about what happens when we're not around for our children. And I know some people will say as well that they hope their child dies before them. Honestly, I can say that isn't me, because my daughter has a life plan and that's given me peace of mind. Of course I still worry about her future, but I worry about my other daughter's future as well, because it's natural to worry about our children. But I can say I believe they will both be fine when I'm gone. So where do we start when it comes to planning? Well, a quick search online will give you the 3 key elements of a good plan. 1 is clear goals, 2 is actionable steps, and 3 is having a realistic timeline. When it comes to this first step of clear goals, I think the language here can make this first step much more daunting than it needs to be. It makes so much more sense, at least to me, to think of this as targets. Same idea, different word. But this is a term we and our children are familiar with from school. And when we think about setting targets, we should have short-term, medium-term and long-term targets. Because planning, like any skill, needs practice. So getting our children to set those short-term targets gives them practice. And like everyone, they need to see the benefits of planning. We do this at the moment with our daughter in her job. She writes down targets every day. To be fair, they're often the same targets, but that's fine, because repetition is a precursor to creating a habit, and those targets should become habits anyway, so she can set new targets in the future. To get started on setting clear targets, it can help as well to think about those different areas of their lives. Daily living, for example, often makes for good short-term targets. That might be something as simple as loading a plate in the dishwasher or making their own bed. For medium-term targets, a relationship goal like finding a club to join and over time talking to people there to develop their social skills might be a good target to set. When it comes to purpose, the long-term target might be paid work, but of course before that will be the short-term and medium-term targets that will lead there. That is essentially why we have the linear stops on our purpose line of school and then work experience. When it comes to finance, long-term goals might be the targets you set relating to setting up something like a trust. When it comes to long-term planning, it's also useful to think about a vision for the future. What matters most to you when it comes to your child's future? With so many people believing in their right to tell us what our children can't do, there is a real freedom in letting our imagination wander, letting go of the limitations and just exploring the possibilities. I also think that we need to do this to show our children we believe in them and their potential. Once you have those targets, then it's better to focus on a few to get started. Ideally, these should be across the 4 lines to take advantage of the fact that these do link together. Daily living skills, for example, can help with purpose, and relationships develop during purpose, and of course purpose can lead to financial rewards. I may have mentioned in a past life, I was a teacher, and one of the subjects I taught was business, and many times talked about the idea of having SMART goals. So SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. When it comes to specific, just making sure the target is clear is enough. It has to be easy to understand. In order to know if a target can be reached, it has to be measurable, and with most targets this will be simple. Your child will either do it or not do it. For longer term targets, you might want to put in a money amount, for example, around their trust, or approach a certain number of employers about getting them work experience. Any target must be achievable and realistic, because if it's not, then we are setting our children up to fail. This very much links back to why we have an options section in our vocal method. We know what our children's strengths are and what they find challenging. Understand the importance of identifying the options that can make reaching targets easier is really one of the most important parts of planning. This has enabled our daughter to now cook all of her own meals with absolutely no support from us, because we identified a way for her to cook that fits perfectly with her abilities. And finally, any target must be time-bound. This not only relates to making it measurable, but also it is important, as we do in vocal, to assess what's working and what isn't. This is not about failure. This is about understanding that something isn't working and trying another way, rather than continuing again and again doing something that isn't working. This also relates back to options, because during assess we might find that there are now new ways of doing things. Certainly for us, technology has changed a lot of the targets my daughter sets herself, because new technology is now available which enables her to do things she may have in the past found a challenge. The next part of a good plan is having actionable steps. Once you have your targets, you need to break them down into smaller, easier to master steps. Breaking down some tasks will actually look like having a short, medium and long-term target, but for others you will be breaking down a short-term target into small steps. For example, something like making their own lunch. So the target might be to make a sandwich, but you would break that down into steps or smaller targets. In fact, cooking is one of the best examples, because any recipe is all about breaking down the end target, the meal, into smaller steps. But unlike many recipes, no step is too small, because it's when you miss out steps things can get confusing. This is also where techniques like scaffolding can be useful. So if the target is made up of a lot of steps, you can leave them to do the things that they can already do, and then support them on those steps they find challenging. Breaking down targets like this also helps to ensure that there's consistency, because what you really want with a lot of these targets is for them to achieve the target, but then to be able to do the same thing repeatedly. A lot of targets that are set for our young people will be things that they need to do almost every single day. So for example, making food or cleaning. In fact, many of the daily living skills are things that have to be repeated daily or weekly over and over again. And habit is one of the foundations on which my daughter's independence is built. However, like many things, it's important to remember that the first iteration might not be the final one. So when you're breaking down something into steps, this is also about testing in the same way we test recipes. Adjust them for our tastes and make sure they work with a different oven or with a different air fryer in our case. And this is also about coming back to assess again and looking at the steps, and if they're not working, making those adjustments. Sometimes, as the saying goes, you do need to think outside the box, which is exactly how we ended up with the cooking techniques that my daughter uses now. And focus must be on progress, not on perfection, because we just need to be moving forward. And so to the final element of a good plan, a realistic timeline. I've already talked about this when I talked about SMART targets and them being time-bound, so that there's an end point where it's done or maybe a rethink is needed. So I won't repeat myself, but our realistic timeline, if you think about it, is how long we're around. I have until then to get my daughter's life plan sorted. Of course, the problem is that I'm not quite sure how long I'll be around. That's why it's so important to have a short-term, medium-term and long-term plan in place and targets for each of those. That way, every day there's progress. It's not just a case of getting around to doing things. Things are happening now. And that's also where having the 4 lines, daily living, purpose, relationships and finance, also helps in terms of setting targets for different parts of their future lives. These can link to where our children are in their lives and to their individual strengths and abilities. Our daughter lives at home at the moment, so has a long-term target of living away from us, and the short and medium-term targets to make that happen. She has short-term targets for purpose in her job, as well as medium-term targets for how she sees her future work life. In terms of relationships, she has a medium-term target of developing a friendship with one person, and then the longer-term target of getting more involved in her community. When it comes to finance, her short-term targets relate to managing her own money, and we have short, medium and long-term targets to secure her financial security. We know we have to have all these in place just in case the unimaginable happens and we don't get to those long-term plans. At the very least, the short-term plans are in place and can be built on by others. Her life plan is written down, which will also make their job easier because they know what the plan is. So I'll finish with a famous saying about planning from Benjamin Franklin. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And we all know that failing isn't an option when it comes to our children's futures. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to listen. And I hope that the stories and the solutions shared on here help you as you support your young person to create their future. And if you know anyone who would find the ideas useful, please share the podcast with them. Of course, if you want to, you can leave a review, because that is another way families who need this information can find it more easily. This show is created as part of Red Giraffe Solutions. To find out what the Red Giraffe is all about, visit redgiraffesolutions.com, where you'll find more resources around daily living, relationships, purpose and financial security. I'm at Debra Caldow on Instagram and Facebook. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a conversation with you on any of those. Bye for now.